You don't have to be the best to beat the best.
That's how you pass Joe Montana on the all-time yards list.
Be prepared to have your mind blown as we present to you 10 NFL players who shockingly have better career stats than these 10 NFL legends. Joe Flacco, more passing yards than Joe Montana. Long before Tom Brady, San Francisco 49ers icon Joe Montana was the consensus GOAT pick. He won all 4 Super Bowl games he played in and didn't throw a single interception in either of those contests. If Brady hadn't reeled off 4 more Super Bowl wins in the back half of his career, Montana would still be carrying the GOAT title. And yet, Joe Cool didn't actually have the eye-popping stats you 90s and 2000s kids would have envisioned. Yeah, he's not even top 20 all-time in passing yards, and it's only a matter of time until several active QBs boot him out of the top 20 in all-time passing touchdowns. Incredibly, Montana's 40,551 career passing yards are actually less than journeyman signal caller Joe Flacco. You might be screaming, different eras! Or maybe note that injuries didn't cut into the later part of Flacco's career and all, but Montana racked up all those passing yard totals in 192 games. Through the 2022 season, Flacco had 183 game appearances under his belt, but he wasn't a starter for 20 of them. Even in less game appearances, Flacco had 42,320 passing yards through 2022. It's even more mind-blowing to think that Flacco has more passing yards considering several things. 1, he's never been a Pro Bowler. 2, he's thrown for 4,000 passing yards once in an era where 4,000 passing yards is the expectation for any starting QB. Also, Flacco's career high in TDs is 27. Even in a less pass-happy era, Montana threw a career high 31 in the 1987 season. Flacco was always so frustratingly inconsistent in the regular season, but usually turned it on in the playoffs, as evidenced by his Super Bowl 47 championship ring and MVP. But to have more passing yards than the second best QB of all time? Yeah, we still have a tough time believing it. John Abraham, more sacks than Lawrence Taylor. The former New York Giants linebacker Lawrence Taylor is by far the greatest and most dominant defensive player in NFL history. Yep, there's a guy who probably won't ever reach Canton who just barely sits above him on the career sacks list. That person is former New York Jets, Atlanta Falcons, and Arizona Cardinals standout John Abraham, who sits 13th on the all-time list with 133.5. Taylor, a 2-time Super Bowl champion, is also the last defensive player to have won the MVP award, earning the honors in 1986. Yet his 132.5 career sacks actually placed Taylor in a tie with Leslie O'Neal for 14th most ever. Taylor didn't play as long as many other all-time great defensive players, but Bill Belichick said it best: everybody else is below Taylor. Matt Ryan, more passing yards than Dan Marino. Matt Ryan's final season with the Indianapolis Colts in 2022 was nothing short of a disaster. But it wasn't entirely all for naught. That's because the 2016 league MVP did just enough to surpass an all-time great on the career passing yards leaderboard. Though he is bound to be surpassed in the coming years, Ryan sat 7th on the career passing yards list after the 2022 campaign with 62,792. That put him ahead of Miami Dolphins legend Dan Marino, who walked away from the game with 61,361 career passing yards. Hard to believe that Ryan had more than Marino for multiple reasons. First of all, Marino played 242 games compared to Ryan's 234. And team accomplishments aside, Marino is arguably a top 5 all-time QB, with 5 passing yard titles and 3 passing touchdown crowns on his resume. Ryan won't even go down as a top 5 QB of his era. So it's just tough to believe that a borderline Hall of Famer had more passing yards than a man who retired with the most passing yards and passing TDs before getting passed by Brett Favre. Steven Jackson, more rushing yards than LaShawn McCoy. Jackson was a model of consistency for the St. Louis Rams, exceeding 1,000 rushing yards every single year from 2005 to 2012. But Jackson had just 3 Pro Bowl nods and 2 second-team All-Pro selections. No first-team nods, and he never even led the NFL in rushing yards or rushing touchdowns. Then there's LaShawn McCoy, a likely Hall of Famer with 2 Super Bowl rings, 6 Pro Bowls, 2 first-team All-Pro nods, and an NFL 2010s All-Decade Team selection. Not to mention that Shady led the league in rushing yards in 2013 and in rushing touchdowns in 2011. And yet, even though he played 160 games compared to McCoy's 170, it's Jackson who is slightly ahead of the career rushing yards list. Jackson had 11,438, that places him 18th of all time, while McCoy is 4 spots behind him at 11,102. McCoy was most certainly the better player, accomplished way more, and appeared in more games. So how is it that Jackson had more career rushing yards? Seriously, someone please make this make sense. Eric Allen, more interceptions than Deion Sanders. Deion Sanders may be the greatest NFL cornerback to ever live, but you kids might be surprised to learn that prime time isn't all that high on the career interceptions list. Sanders' 53 INTs place him in a tie with fellow Hall of Famer Ty Law for 24th overall. But maybe we shouldn't be surprised that Sanders' interception total isn't that high, since opposing quarterbacks usually applied common sense by not throwing in his direction. That said, we were still shocked to learn that Eric Allen has more career interceptions than Sanders. Granted, he only has 1 more with 54 on his career, but the 6-time Pro Bowler had just 1 career first-team All-Pro nod. He wasn't in Canton, he isn't a Super Bowl champion, and he didn't win Defensive Player of the Year honors, which Primetime did in 1994. Derek Mason, more receiving yards than Michael Irvin. Now, Mason displayed tremendous longevity by suiting up for 230 NFL games over a 15-year span from 1997 to 2011. But the Michigan State product was, surprisingly, only a 2-time Pro Bowler who never led the NFL in any major receiving category. And then there's Dallas Cowboys icon Michael Irvin. 3-time Super Bowl champ, 5-time Pro Bowler, 1991 receiving yards champion, 1990s All-Decade selection, Pro Football Hall of Famer. Now, if you were to present both resumes to the average fan, you'd surely assume that Irvin had more career receiving yards, right? Nope. By awfully slim margins, it is Mason who sits above Irvin on the career receiving yards list with 12,061. Irvin is barely behind Mason with 11,094. Of course, Irvin unfortunately had to retire after his age 33 season in 1998 after suffering cervical spinal stenosis. Mason ended up playing in 71 more games than Irvin, but you still wouldn't think that a good, not great receiver would be ahead of one of the best to ever do it here. Carson Palmer, more passing touchdowns than Warren Moon. Before he made the jump to the NFL in 1984, Moon was a superstar for Edmonton's CFL team. He led the club to 5 straight Grey Cup League championships from 1978 to 82 before moving south of the border. Moon was a model of consistency in the NFL. He led the NFL in passing yards in 1990 and 91 and racked up 9 Pro Bowl nods. Incredibly, the former Houston Oilers and Minnesota Vikings star played until his age 44 season in 2000. And then there's Carson Palmer, one of the most inconsistent and frustrating quarterbacks in league history. He retired at the youngish age of 38 after the 2017 season and missed at least 6 games in 4 different seasons. With 182 career games of work, the ex-Bengal, Raider, and Cardinal was not exactly a model of longevity like Moon. And yet, it's Palmer who has the higher career passing touchdowns total. Palmer retired with 294 passing touchdowns in 182 games. Moon had 291 in 208 games. The latter is in the Hall of Fame, while the former can only dream of getting there. Cory Dillon, more rushing touchdowns than Frank Gore. This one just makes no sense whatsoever. Frank Gore is 3rd all-time in rushing yards with 16,000. Cory Dillon is 20th with 11,241. Gore played in 241 games, Dillon played in 150. Gore crushed Dillon's in terms of longevity, and yet you're telling us that Dillon has more career rushing scores than Gore, despite nearly 5,000 less career rushing yards. Dillon is just barely ahead of the 5-time Pro Bowler and 2010's All-Decade Team selection, and we still don't understand how. Steve Smith Sr. more receiving yards than Marvin Harrison. There is no shortage of analysts and fans who don't think that Steve Smith Sr. belongs in the Hall of Fame. Was he truly that great or just very good for a very long time? It's a fun debate to have with your peers. But you know what's not up for debate? Marvin Harrison was far and away the better and more dominant receiver. Harrison, not Smith, was one of 10 wide receivers named to the NFL 100th anniversary all-time team. There simply wasn't a QB receiver duo like that of Peyton Manning and Harrison in Indianapolis. Harrison was an 8-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time first team, and a 5-time second team All-Pro. Harrison led the NFL in catches and in receiving yards. He helped Peyton win not 1, not 2, but 3 league MVP awards during their run together in Indy. Now don't get me wrong, Smith Sr. was no slouch himself with 5 Pro Bowl selections and the Triple Crown of receiving in 2005. But unlike Harrison, a proud Canton member, Smith Sr. wasn't named to the 2000s All-Decade team, and Smith was never in the discussion for being a top 3 receiver, which Harrison was during the bulk of his playing career. And yet, it is indeed Smith Sr. who has the more career receiving yards at 14,731. Seriously, who would have guessed? Jay Cutler, more completions than Troy Aikman. Few quarterbacks were more heavily criticized and loathed by their own fan base than Jay Cutler, who spent the bulk of his career with the Chicago Bears. Shocking as it may be, however, Cutler is just outside the top 30 all-time in career completions with 3,048. That's more than Hall of Famers Troy Aikman, Johnny Unitas, Steve Young, Kurt Warner, and Y.A. Tittle. Seriously, can you believe that? Because I can't. But which other NFLers shockingly have greater career stats than an NFL legend? Let us know in the comment section below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys next time.